Hello everyone. So we are Group 1 from Leadership class subject from University of Lampung with our lecturer is Dr. Kumala Hayati SAMM. And today we will discuss about leadership, ethic, and value. In chapter 1, we refer to a distinction between leader and manager that say leaders do the right things, where a manager do things right. But what are the right things? What are the right things? Are they the morally right things? The ethical right things? The right things for the company to be successful and who say what the right things are? Leader face dilemmas that requires choice between competing set of value and priorities. And the best leader recognize the face them with a commitment to do what is right, not just what is expected. Of course, the first doing what is right sounds deceptively simple, but sometimes it takes a great moral courage to do what is right, even when the right action seems clear. Whatever true leaders means, most people would agree that at a minimum, it is characterized by a high degree of trust between leader and follower. Panis and Goldsmith describe four qualities of leadership that endanger trust. First is vision, who pull people together on the basis of shared belief and a common sense of organizational purpose and belonging. Second is empathy, who show they understand the world as we see and experience it. Third is consistent. This does not mean that we only trust leaders whose position never change, but that change are understood as a process of evolution in light of relevant new evidence. The last is integrity, who demonstrate their commitment to higher principle through their action. Value, ethic, and morals. Value are construct representing generalized behavior or state of affairs that are considered by the individual to be important, and they are central part of leaders' psychology makeup. When Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me that," he was expressing the value he placed on political freedom. Ethic is a branch of philosophy that deals with the right conduct. In other words, a principle of right conduct or a system of moral value. Moral is relating to the standard of good or bad behavior, fairness, honesty, etc. that each person believes in rather than to law. Are there generational differences in value? In differentiating key terms, ethics and morals are that should and out of life. Ethical and moral reasoning is a process used to make moral ethical decisions, focus on how rather than what decision reach. Certain development theory poses that progressively higher states of moral reasoning can be attained. And value do not necessarily involve moral or ethic, often determined significant by culture, belief in which individual or groups has an emotional investment. Zemke, researcher who has looked at differences in value across generations and how those value differences affect their approach to work and leadership. Following is his delineation of four generations of workers. It's molded by distinctive experiences during the critical development period. First is the veteran, 1922 until 1943. Veteran came of age during the Great Depression and World War II, and they represent a wealth of lore and wisdom. Next is the baby boomers, 1942 until 1960. The post-war babies who came of age during violent society protests, experimentation with new lifestyle, and perceived questioning of establishment value. The Gen Xer, 1960 until 1980. Gen Xer grew up during the era of the Watergate scandal, the energy crisis, higher divorce rate, MTV, and corporate downsing. Many were latchkey kids, They are entrepreneurially and they embrace change. The last is the Nexter, 1980 until now, also known as millennials. This is our generation. Nexter share an optimism born, perhaps from having been raised by parents devoted to the task of bringing their generation to adulthood. Some researchers have looked at how the values of Gen Xer impact the leadership process at work. One clear finding from this research involved the distinctly different view of authority held by Xers than previous generation. While past generation may have at least acknowledged positional authority, this new generation has little respect for and less interest in leaders who are unable to demonstrate that they can personally produce. In other words, this generation doesn't define leading as sitting in meeting and making profound vision statement, but instead as eliminating obstacles and giving employee what they need to work well and comfortably. So it can say that there are generational differences in value, moral and ethical reasoning and action. Moral reasoning refers to the process leader use to make decisions about ethical and unethical behavior. Moral reasoning does not refer to the morality of individual per se or their exposed value, but rather to the manner by which they solve moral problems. Rushworth Kidder has identified four ethical dilemmas that are so common to our experience that they serve as model or paradigms. First is trust versus loyalty, second individual versus community, next is short-term versus long-term, and last is justice versus mercy. And to deal with this ethical dilemma, Kidder offered three principles to resolve ethical dilemma, like and-based thinking is often characterized as do what the best for the greatest number of people, and rule-based thinking is following the highest principle or duty. The last is care-based thinking, or many things of as the golden rule. It is do what you want others to do to you. Why do good people do bad things? Bandura, in particular, has pointed out several ways people with firm moral principles nonetheless may behave badly without feeling guilty or remorse for their behavior. We should look at each of these. The first is moral justification, involve reinterpreting otherwise immoral behavior in terms of a higher purpose. This is most dramatically relevant in the behavior of combatants in war. Next is advantageous comparison. Let's one avoid self-contempt for one behavior by comparing it to even more heinous behavior by others. Next, discernment of responsibility. People may violate personal moral standards by attributing responsibility to others. Division of responsibility, whereby responsibility behavior becomes easier to engage and live with if others are behave the same way. Disregard or distortion of consequences. People minimize the harms caused by their behavior. Dehumanization. It is easier to treat people other badly when they are dehumanized, as advanced in epithets like gooks or Satan's worship. Attribution of blame. People sometimes try to justify moral behavior by claiming it was caused by someone else's action.
Ethics and values-based approaches to leadership. Ethical leadership as having two core components. First, the moral person and the moral manager. The moral person is seen as principal decision maker who cares about people and the broader society. The actions of such people indicate they try to do the right things personally and professionally. and they can be characterized as honest, fair, and open. More than being just moral people, ethical leaders are moral managers who make ethics an explicit part of their leadership agenda by communicating an ethics and values message, by visibly and intentionally role modeling ethical behavior. Two prominent approaches in this movement are described in greater detail here. First, authentic leadership is grounded in the principle found in the familiar adage from Greek philosophy, to think oneself be true. Authentic leaders exhibit a consistency between their values, their beliefs, and their actions. The roots of authentic leadership are also in various expressions of the humanistic movement in psychology, including Maslow's theory of self-actualization. Servant leadership has since 1970 described a quite different approach to leadership than that derived from a bureaucratic and mechanistic view of organization wherein workers are thought of as mere cogs in a machine. 10 characteristics are often associated with servant leaders. As you'll see, most of them also seem in line with the idea of authentic leadership just described. First, listening. Listening is while all leaders need to communicate effectively, the focus is often on communicating to others. But servant leadership puts the emphasis on listening effectively to others. Secondly, empathy. Empathy is servant leaders need to understand others' feeling and perspective. Then healing. Healing is servant leaders help foster each person's emotionally and spiritual health and wellness. And then awareness. Awareness is servant leaders understand their own values, feelings, strength, and weakness. Persuasion. Rather than relying on positional authority, servant leaders influence others through their persuasiveness. Conceptualization. Servant leaders need to integrate present realities and future possibilities. For foresight, servant leaders need to have a well-developed sense of intuition about how the past, present, and future are connected. Stewardship. Servant leaders are stewards who hold an organization resources in trust for the greater good. Commitment to others' growth. The ultimate test of a servant leader's work is whether those served develop toward being more responsible, caring, and competent individuals. And the last is building community. Such individual growth and development is most likely to happen when one is a part of a supportive community. Unfortunately, numerous factors like geographic mobility and the general impersonalism of large organizations have eroded people's sense of community. The next topic is the roles of ethics and values in organizational leadership, leading by example, the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the most quoted principles of good leadership is leadership by example. But what does it mean? To simplify ethical leadership and be an ethical role model. In one study, people from a range of organizations were interviewed about a person they knew who had been an ethical role model at work. Not all ethical role models exhibit exactly the same qualities, but four general categories of attitudes and behaviors seem to characterize the group. Interpersonal behaviors. They show care, concern, and compassion for others. They were hardworking and helpful. They valued their relationship with others, working actively to maintain and sustain them. They tended to focus on the positive rather than the negative and accepted others' failures. Basic fairness, a specific quality of their interpersonal behavior, was manifested in the fairness shown others. They were not only open to input from others but actively saw it. And then, ethical actions and self-expectation. They held themselves to high ethical standards and behave consistently in both their public and private life. Articulating ethical standards. They articulate a consistent ethical vision and were uncompromising toward it and the high ethical standards it implied. They held others ethically accountable and put ethical standards above personal and short-term company interests. Quality of ethical climate in the organization. Ethical climates refer to those in which ethical standards and norms have been consistently, clearly, and pervasively communicated throughout the organization and embraced and enforced by organizational leaders in both word and example. Then, unethical climates are those in which questionable or outright unethical behavior exists with the little action taken to correct such behavior or where such misbehavior is even condoned. It's likely that employees experience some degree of moral distress whenever a manager is perceived to behave unethically, but the distress is usually greater in unethical climates. In fact, being in a formal leadership role imposes unique ethical responsibilities and challenges. Leaders more than followers possess unique degrees of both legitimate and coercive power, enjoy greater privilege, have access to more information, have greater authority and responsibility, interact with a broader range of stakeholders who expect equitable treatment, and must balance sometimes competing loyalties when making decisions. With conditions like this, which sometimes also may represent seductive temptation to excuse one's own behavior, it is all the more important for leaders to take positive steps to create an ethical climate and hold themselves accountable to it. Creating and sustaining an ethical climate. So how do leaders do this? Several fronts of leadership actions are needed to establish an ethical organization climate. First, format ethics policies and procedures. It's sometimes said that you can legislate morality, and the same may be said about legislating an ethical climate. The next is core ideology. A core ideology is basically an organization's heart and soul. It represents the organization's purpose, guiding principles, basic identity, and most important values. And then integrity, structural reinforcement. An organization structure and system can be designed to encourage higher ethical performance and discourage unethical performance. The next is process focus. There also needs to be explicit concern with process, not just the achievement of tangible individual, team, and organizational goals. That's all for our presentation. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.